Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 148. My name is NBZ, that's 3 letters, they're all magic of course, and I am here talking about Nintendo, as is the per usual, but I'm also back home. I'm here in Edinburgh for a little while, which is good fun, and I'm joined by Bally, who also is in Edinburgh. Look at that, magic, it's all come together.
But we are not in the same room. We are
not
in
currently.
Different parts of Edinburgh.
Yes. However, we were in the same room for a period of time, which I'm sure we'll discuss on today's episode, which will be a lot of fun. So yes, as a result of that, my audio may be a little different. I do have my microphone with me, but I don't have my pop filter, so my P's are probably going to be a little bit rough, so just bear with me on that. Also, we already recorded the second 2 parts of this show, in which I realised that I was sitting a bit too close to my microphone, and so the audio is a little bit blown out, so just bear with for the rest of the show. Hopefully it won't be too bad. I'll do a little bit of audio editing on it, but should be fine. But Bali, how are you doing? How are things going?
I'm good. We played quite a number of games.
Yeah.
Maybe not a chance to talk about all of them, but
Yeah,
it's just multiplayer gaming. What a joy. What a joy multiplayer gaming is. Especially like those local modes in Smash Brothers that we just can't play online, that I just wish they had online.
I know. It breaks my heart, man.
What's the name of that mode again?
It's called Squad Strike.
Squad Strike is just, and it's like a very traditional fighting game mode. The idea that like you pick 5 fighters, and then they just roll in one after the other when they die, and like it's not really something Smash Brothers has done before, but it's just so good.
Right, I mean, I remember playing Soul Calibur 2 back in the day, and that was one of my favourite modes to do, which is just 8 on 8 and choose all your in a row, and then you would keep the same health bar, and you'd stay at the same health. It's similar here with Smash Brothers, stay at the same percentage, and then you just have to work through it with your best characters and choosing which order to do them in and everything. It's all very tactical. It's a lot of fun.
And you can see at the end, Yoshi swept your team. Like,
exactly.
Mario did well, and you can
see who took out who and everything.
Yeah.
I think that playing that with you, playing some Smash Brothers Squad Strike was the most fun I've had with Smash Brothers in a while, and I just wish they would do that online. Nintendo, why do they not allow us to do that? Alas, maybe eventually, when all is said and done with the characters, they'll do some final kind of updates and patch some things in, but I doubt it. At this point, it's kind of, it is what it is, and it's going to be what it's going to be. So anyway, we got a lot to talk about, so Bally, how about you tell fine folks what we are going to be discussing?
For our first segment, we're going to be talking about the games that we have been playing, and there's quite a few. Second segment, we've got your emails, and third segment, there's a bit of a news roundup with the news of the Switch Lite. We'll give our hot takes on that.
Yeah, absolutely. They announced a new Switch that has a better battery, and the Switch Lite itself, so lots to dig into there. Interesting discussion of the future of that platform. But let's kick things off, Bally, with a bit of VR, because I played a lot of VR when I came around to your place.
You did.
And you also have finished up a new VR game that is Nintendo-esque in a way. Moss is a game that I think has a very fairy tale kind of charm to it, and definitely evokes that sense of kind of platformy, puzzly, environmentally type stuff that Nintendo often delve into. Yeah,
very much so. I think where you realize that it's not that Nintendo is like especially when you tried it, and like the jump feels quite small and not good.
Let me tell you, it's maybe alongside Super Lucky's Tale as one of the worst feeling jumps I've ever jumped. Here's a sign that I'm not going to enjoy a video game as much. If you don't have a jump that is a satisfying jump, I might do a video on this one day. It's like top 10 jumps in video games, and like what makes a good jump, what makes a bad jump. But the jump in Moss just feels terrible. It's so small, and it's clearly done in service of the animation, in service of the character and the world they're trying to create. If you don't know what Moss is, it's basically a kind of VR diorama game where there's environments that you're looking into, but you're controlling this mouse who like has a sword and kind of combat and stuff like that. And yeah, it is much more, I would say, from what I had seen, more puzzle solvy, although you said that it's quite a lot of combat in it.
Yeah, because it's very puzzle solvy and there's a bit of combat, you're not actually relying on that jump, which I guess is probably part of the reason that it doesn't feel that great.
It's more of a means to an end or whatever, to get over ledges and stuff like that.
So I think it's one of the most spectacular like VR worlds I've been in the sense that the fact it is dioramas and the camera isn't moving about, it feels very stationary. It allows them to have a huge emphasis on Quill, who's the mouse, and their animations, which I think are one of the strongest parts of the game. Like just seeing Quill and their animations throughout like this really beautiful world, and that fantasy setting, constant narration of the plot, and the storybook setting that you're jumping in and out of this book between levels.
It is somewhat Trine-esque in a
Very
way.
Trine-esque.
Like I noticed the music as well had a real Trine vibe to it. So it's evoking some of that stuff too, which is good because I think Trine has an excellent kind of atmosphere and fairy tale aesthetic to it. So if you're going to ape something, then aping that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, and like the environmental puzzles are really strong. Like it's moving around blocks, holding enemies, using the PlayStation DualShock. That then you can like hold an enemy that shoots things, drag them to a certain point, and they'll shoot like a switch that opens a door. And there's loads of puzzles like that feel very Trine-esque, especially with the motion controls, a bit like the touchscreen on the Wii U gamepad. And the controls themselves don't feel as sort of refined as a game like Astrobot, where you're using the DualShock a lot to interact with the environment. So that's one of the weaker aspects of the game. But a lot of the puzzles and what they're asking you to do with the DualShock is like basic enough that it doesn't become a huge hindrance, and maybe apart from like one or two spots in the entire game. And it is a very short game. It's like 3 or 4 hours, but that constant mix of puzzles, a bit of combat. I think the final sequence with the final boss is actually really impressive, and I don't want to spoil it, but it gave me. I played the entire game with like headphones on and like noise reducing headphones at that over ear, and it was just really immersive to the point where the final boss gave me something like proper shivers and genuinely shocked me at points. Just the way that the huge boss appears on screen very fast and kind of. It's freaky. It's kind of one of those immersive things that a lot of people talk about with VR, and it's just a good example of a game that is very PG but can still really freak you out just by the way that it forces stuff in your face at times. I think it's like one of the most spectacular worlds, and I think the presentation is very short again, and a lot of VR games, like their campaigns are often 4 to 6 hours. This is kind of on the 4-hour end, and it's just a really great package, and it does imply that this is the first chapter in what's going to be, I don't know how many games there could be, but...
Yeah, I was hearing that they had actually put out some DLC for this recently.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you have access to that with your version or what,
I
but...
don't. I think I'll need to check on the PlayStation Store for that, but...
Okay.
That sounds cool. And is that DLC doesn't kind of wrap up anything, do you know?
I have no idea. I just heard that they had put out like another bit of the game, which was some DLC stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's because I did play a bit of it and I did see the final boss and everything. And I think for me it was less impressive than say something like Astrobot in terms of visual fidelity, in terms of things like textures, kind of like just raw. Technical specs, I think that it wasn't as impressive, but it is, you compare a game like Astrobot, which is a Sony first party, has tons of money behind it, and of course they're invested in the platform, versus this independent game that is from a much smaller team with much smaller constraints and everything. And it's still a very impressive game, I think, but for me it didn't seem like something I would particularly enjoy, just because I don't think I really enjoyed the movement of the mouse. And I think it does some interesting stuff in terms of, you as the player interacting with the environment and like helping the mouse along.
I don't think you saw the best of the environmental puzzles, and that's probably my fault.
But to me, I think one of the issues was that certain parts of the environment that you interact with, you use the touchpad to like grab onto them and pull them and push them, whatever.
You use the touchpad? I was using the touchpad.
Do you? I can't remember. Maybe I'm confusing this with Astrobot.
You use the the touchpad is
button?
Astrobot. This game you use like R2, just like
okay.
grab
Maybe
something.
it was the shoulder button, but I think it's just the notion of using that to grab something while also controlling a character at the same time. So you sometimes will have to maneuver whilst also reaching in and doing some motion control. So like you're using traditional controls whilst also being this kind of godlike force in the world, and I think that can get a little tricky at points. That makes it, a little bit little bit tough with some of the stuff, but
yeah. But I thought it was great overall. It genuinely felt like a VR experience of trying, and we know how much we love trying on this show.
Oh yeah.
So, I would highly recommend it to anyone who owns VR. It's a very short game, 3-4 hours, but I think it's definitely worth it.
Cool.
Moss.
Great. And then like that was one of the VR experiences that I tried when I was over your house. Did a lot of stuff, right? So I think maybe...
So this is the first time you tried VR since we went to Gamescom in 2016. So
absolutely.
It's been a while.
Yes. And I played Labo VR, and I think that, when I talked about that, I was like, well, I think this Labo VR stuff is probably like what Astrobot is, except Astrobot probably does this stuff better. And I would say that, yes, Astrobot probably does that stuff better. What I will say is someone who suffers from motion sickness is the way that the camera moves with your character in Astrobot is not well thought out for people with motion sickness, in the sense that when you stop, it is jarring. The movement just stops, and it feels like you are in a fast car, and then and it's not necessarily that the screen is moving that quickly, but when you don't have movement and the sensation of movement is being created within a space, it causes a kind of messing with my mind, right? And so that's why like a lot of motion sickness is caused because people know that they are not actually moving, but their brain thinks they are moving, right? And so it's that disconnect that causes the sickness. And with Astrobot, especially initially when I started playing it, the camera as it moves, it has, if you're just continuously moving, it's fine because it has a good speed, like very steadiness to it, but it's not very smooth at either starting or stopping, and it's very sudden. And so when it starts and when it stops, every time that happened, my brain kind of went a little bit woozy. So I think that's where they could definitely improve on that game, is just having it be a bit more accessible. And I understand it's like first wave VR stuff and stuff like that, so it's not going to be that well optimized, but that's a thing that I noticed, and I think that it's important to talk about as someone with motion sickness who has played VR stuff, because I will pick up on stuff that just won't affect someone like you, Bally, because you just don't get it. And I think it's a lot of people are wary about it, right? But what I will say is that Astrobot is actually a game that is very playable for someone like me, who does have motion sickness. It does have those moments, but I think it is very interesting in the way that it uses the entirety of the environment, right? Like you're able to see a lot of secrets by peering around corners and looking above you and around you, and a lot of that stuff is pretty delightful. A lot of it is, sometimes you'll fall down into a smaller area and you'll have to trampoline your way back up, and I think part of the problem, and this happened with Labo VR as well, is the further away the character is from the camera, the less pixel density you have, and thus the blurrier it gets. And because you're working with such low pixel density in the first place, because of course with VR the frame rate has to be 90 or higher for it to not make anyone motion sick. This is one of the problems with Breath of the Wild in VR, which is just garbage. The fact that game runs at 30 frames per second. No one should ever play a 30 frames per second game in VR. It is licensed to vomit out the window within an instant. You have to have frame rates that are higher than 60. You just have to, because you can't handle it otherwise. So as a result of that, this game has to have a lot of frames of animation. It has to be really smooth and stuff like that. But as a result of it having a high frame rate, it really has to sacrifice on the visual fidelity end, which means the further away Astrobot gets from the camera, the harder it is to see, and therefore to some degree the harder it is to control. But that's kind of balanced out by the Mario 3D Land-esque platforming sections, which make platforming far easier because of course you can see in stereoscopic 3D, right? And because of that, your ability to judge depth and know where you'll land and where you'll jump to is just eased so much. But I think for me, the standout stuff about Astrobot is not necessarily the platforming, because I think I've mentioned before about I don't really understand why people rave about this game, because if you look at it just on a regular screen and you just watch it as a video game, it seems like a very average platformer, right? It doesn't seem like it's doing that much interesting. But there are things within the world and the space that you exist in, and how the player character interacts with the environment and Astrobot itself, that create that sensation of wow, this is something new and interesting. And it's everything from bopping your head to knock a football back at an enemy, to kind of perspectives on a minecart level, to huge bosses that have a really good sense of just size to them and just presence to them, right?
Yeah, and head-butting back at footballs at your head and looking at a point and then like hitting a football or another ball into that to break something. And
right, like one of the ways that it works is Astrobot can pick up these balls, and the way that he throws them is because you don't really have second stick control to use like an aiming reticle, because your head is an aiming reticle essentially.
Yes.
All you have to do is like look at the target, and it basically locks onto the target with your head looking at them. So you can have Astrobot completely off screen, just standing there holding something, look 180 degrees and press a button, and he will lock on and throw it at that enemy. I think that's just a really smart way of getting around some of the problems you may have with controlling a game like this in a space that is so fully three-dimensional.
Did you have a favorite level? You played about 4 or 5.
Well, I think I was very impressed by some of the water stuff. I think especially there was an underwater section where there were waves coming at you, and the sensation of the waves coming towards you and like falling under, you being under the waves, seeing Astrobot above you. So that stuff I think was really excellently done and just had a sense about it, like something I'd never really seen before done in VR. So I think that was probably the most impressive stuff for me. The bosses were cool. I definitely think they're neat. But yeah, I think overall as an experience, I still stand by the fact that it's like kind of a subpar average platformer. But I think it gets over that problem by being incredibly charming and bright and colorful, having gorgeous environments, and ultimately just having that interactivity.
It's like a spectacle, yeah.
Yeah, but having a spectacle
with that interactivity.
Absolutely. Like, and that's the thing. I think we were talking a little bit before we started recording. I think the thing for me with VR is I actually don't care about video games in VR. The thing that is so astonishing to me is just existing within a space. And I think the thing that epitomized that more than anything was the fucking Star Wars demo of being in that X-Wing and just looking out the side of the ship and seeing space endlessly with asteroids everywhere and just watching X-Wings fly by you. And it was, as a Star Wars fan, as someone who like loves that franchise, and to be honest is not a huge like fan of X-Wings or like the space sections in that series. I'm more about Jedi.
You're not a Rogue Squadron fan, like
no
that much.
But the idea of flying through space with those asteroids and just looking at everything and like dodging and like following people around and just flying 360 was insane. It was like you should have recorded me, Bally, because like
I really wish I had.
The way I was just fucking like hollering and just going crazy about it, I was like, this is insane. And it was this magical experience that was unlike anything I've ever experienced in VR, and yet it was also one of the worst experiences I've had, because holy shit did it make me motion sick. Like, not terribly, I pulled out before it got that bad, but the notion of like me moving my
you pulled out when the TIE fighters came.
Exactly, as soon as I had to like shoot ships and like fly around in crazy corners.
A lot of use you are to the Rebel Alliance. Come up right to the front line, and then
exactly.
I'm out of here.
I would be a deserter, no doubt about that. But I was doing like, I was going upside down. I was like doing the loops and stuff, and Bally was like, "What are you doing? You insane person! You're gonna make yourself vomit in my room." And I'm like, "But this is so fucking cool! Look at what I'm doing." At the same time, it is hard because without that sense of movement of my body, I can't really sit in that thing for longer than 15 minutes. 15 minutes was absolutely my maximum. And I'm glad I did it, but also like, wow, I don't know if I can handle any more of something like that.
Would a stronger visual fidelity like through a Vive or a Future headset help perhaps with that? Or would there still be a lack of feeling like you're moving that's the main cause?
Yeah, it's nothing to do with visual fidelity, because quite frankly, like, as low as the resolution is on PSVR, like,
still looks really good.
Right, just the sense of place, right? The sense of like the asteroid. One of my favorite things was like tiny little rocks, tiny little asteroids that you would shoot and they would like explode in front of you and pass the windshield. And like, man, that is the most fucking Star Wars thing ever.
Because it's like full 3D, like these asteroids just in front of you.
Yeah, and like the way the cockpit is modeled inside, all that stuff is just so expertly done. Like the Star Wars-ness of it is at a high tier.
And EA have been really good at that generally, even if their games feel the controls aren't always the best, and
right?
The we've criticized EA and Star Wars.
Like I would never fault EA for getting the Star Wars part wrong, because
done that
like
well.
You look at the blaster sounds and the animation and the sound, like just sound design is one of the most important things in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And the EA games have actually nailed it. It's actually probably the best part about those Battlefront games that they've put out. But yeah, this was a transcendent experience in a very different way.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool one. Like, it for me, it's something very, very special. I agree with you about that Star Wars VR experience. It's nostalgic in a way. The music, the presentation, and the sound design is just really, really impressive. And God, I want a whole game like that.
Yeah, I know.
With better
controls. I couldn't handle a whole game. That's the problem. Like, I would literally have to play it for 10 minutes a day and just slowly inch my way through it. But yeah, that was just astounding. And then, like, among other things that we played, I think the other standout for me was Superhot, which I'm a huge fan of the original Superhot on PC. And I think the moment for me that did it was when I was doing this level. And you're behind a pool table, and you got one guy with a shotgun in front, and you got these two other guys running at you from the side. And what I'll say is, like, the fault of Superhot on PlayStation is the tracking isn't great, and so sometimes it will not know exactly where your hand is, or it will say outside play area, and it'll keep forcing you away. And some of that stuff is just the technical limitations of PlayStation VR as a platform, that it's not quite as up to snuff as the others. But one of the worst things about it is that when you try and throw an object, it's just very unintuitive. Like, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like you can aim properly when you throw ninja stars or pool balls or bottles or whatever. Shooting guns is fine because that's kind of point and click, but like throwing an object and getting the correct momentum, it's not. It doesn't quite work.
No.
And so I was having a real trouble with this section, and like I'm just like going over again and again, and then it gets to this point where I'm like, okay, I took out the one guy, took out the other guy, and I'm just like ducking on the floor underneath the pool table, and like as he's shooting above me, and like I very gingerly like loop my hand over the top, like curve it over the pool table to like gingerly pick up a pool ball, and then like sidle across the side, and then try and throw it at him. And it's one of those things because I was literally like crouched on the floor, like physically myself was crouched, and I must have looked like an idiot just like reaching over to this pool table to pull this pool ball. But in that moment, I felt like this is what VR is made for, is to give you these moments of literal presence within the space and your body doing what just naturally it would do were you in that scenario.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just amazing. I thought that was phenomenal.
How did you feel about the shooting of different types of guns and dodging bullets in Superhot VR?
Yeah, I mean, dodging bullets is always going to be a fun thing to do. It's like the Matrix realized it really is. And, you know, that's one of the best things about the original game. But I will say that the sensation of doing it yourself, it's markedly different, of course. And so your body is just moving out of the way, just trying to slide by, and just I think the coolest thing is just like standing there and just watching the bullets slowly pass by into the distance. It's like very, very, very cool. The gun stuff is fine. Like it's more about it's a similar thing where you're predicting where they're going to be almost, and not shooting at where they are, because they will move as time moves.
Yes.
But yeah, no, Superhot VR is high up there. And we also did some Beatsabre, which I enjoy Beatsabre. I think it's really cool. Again, like it's more of a traditional video game. It's like Guitar Hero. But having lightsabers, the one thing I didn't realize is like you can hit them against each other, and you can cross them, and they'll just like buzz at each other. And because of the vibration in the controllers, it actually gives a pretty decent sensation of that.
And you were saying the move controllers actually feel really like high quality.
They do, yeah. If you're comparing them to a Wii Remote, then it's definitely a step up from that. But I imagine if I was to have, you know, Oculus or Vive controllers, they would feel, you know, another kind of grade above that. One of the weird things I found about VR is like how hard it is to pause anything in VR. Like, and I'm like, wait a second, this should be like the easiest thing in the world, because VR, you need to be able, if you need to get out of there, or if something happens in the house, like you need to get out of that situation quick, and you want to be able to pause your game if the phone goes or something like that, right? And so constantly I was like, Bally, how do I put, and you look at the controller for like 5 minutes, you're like, I don't know what button pauses, and it was just a bit of a faff, and I'm a little confused as to why it's so difficult to just do menu stuff in VR. It's weird.
Yeah, there's no like universal pause function, and it ends up where you want to just press the home button to pause, which is kind of the PlayStation override universal function, which isn't a good solution, but it kind of works in a way, an unintended way, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, that was VR. I can't remember if I played anything else. I think that was most of the stuff that we did. But I think, as I said to you, I don't necessarily have a hankering to go out and buy one of these things. I feel like I've got my fill, like I've experienced a variety of stuff. I would like to play through all of Astrobot at some point. I think that would be a good thing to do, because I think that every level that you showed me, all of it is so unique and so handcrafted. And I get where the Nintendo comparisons come from, because there is a very whimsical quality to it, but also in terms of some of the just straight up game design stuff feels whole cloth like they would do something like this, right? Some of the motion stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel like Nintendo's platformer in VR.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'd like to play that at some point, but aside from that, I feel like I've got my fill. I understand a lot of these games now, and I'm like, okay, cool. I've had that experience. I don't necessarily need to have it anytime soon again. But it'd be. I'm kind of waiting for the platform to develop a bit more, get some more games and things like that. Because I think, in honesty, the games that I played at your place were like the major ones, and I don't really know any other major VR games that are really worth playing. From what people have said, because just quite a small batch at the current time. Great.
There's definitely a handful that I've not tried yet. I keep saying Blood and Wine, but it's Blood and Truth that I do want to try, that came out this year. That's made by that London team that Sony have working on VR games.
Cool. So yeah, that's where you've been playing some Moss, and Bali, I know you've also been trucking on through a video game to beat before another video game comes out later this year. Yes,
I have been plowing on through Pokemon Sun ahead of Fire Emblem coming out in about a week's time. So I am really enjoying Pokemon Sun. I think I'm in the final quarter of the game. But yeah, I'm having a really good time with it, and I thought I would have a good time with it. I don't know what I was maybe expecting from a game like Pokemon Sun, but because Pokemon Diamond was the last mainline game I played, like start to finish, and I have played Pokemon Red like a few years ago on the podcast since, and that was a really enjoyable experience, more so than I thought I would enjoy that game, going back to it on my 3DS. But I feel like the series has really dumbed down like the difficulty, both at almost every level. Like it feels like I'm always over leveled versus the Pokemon I'm facing. It feels like the routes are far more linear, far shorter. The world just feels smaller in a way, not just because my character feels bigger, but it just feels a lot easier.
Do you think the world feels smaller because they are inherently like within, like the world is Hawaii, or it's like islands, right?
Yeah, so like four different
islands are going to be naturally smaller spaces overall. Do you think that it's just going to feel that way because of where it's set?
Yeah, I think to a degree that does play a factor, and I would be interested to see what X and Y feel like. But that's just one area I feel it's dumbed down a bit. Like it's also, there's literally a pointer now put on your map where it's basically go to this pointer and you will advance the mainline story, and like that is just feels completely out of whack with kind of a traditional JRPG or like the Pokemon series. So I think I mentioned this to you off mic, but you said they didn't have that in X and Y. So I'd be interested to see if that's a feature that returns for Sun and Moon, because for what I'm doing and like trying to, beat this game ahead of Fire Emblem, I don't mind having that marker. Like it's fine just to go back and realize, right, that's where I want to go to advance. But if I was playing this sort of as a child, where I'd want to go much more slowly and take my time, enjoy the sights a lot more, I'd find that marker a little frustrating. Like it's kind of leering over you, like, come on, this is how you advance the story, get on and do it. And kind of in JRPGs where it's sometimes nice to just chill out and go through at your own pace, it does feel quite against that idea, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, to some degree it's helpful because it means that you know the directions you can go in that aren't the main quest, right? Because a lot of the times when I'm playing video games, I'm like, okay, there's 2 routes I can take. I'm going to check out the one because what if there's a thing there I can get, and then I want to go on the main path. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that, in some senses, is fine. I feel like it sounds hypocritical, right? Because some games, things like the original Legends of Zelda, we always talk about, it's too obtuse, we don't know where the fuck to go, it doesn't make any sense, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And in the same breath, we'll talk about our experience with Pokemon when we were younger, and like it is hypocritical because we would talk to each other on the playground, and we'd talk to our friends about like, oh, but how do you do that? And like, I remember having a phone conversation with one of our American friends who was like, yeah, you know that you can go to Kanto? And I was like, what the hell? Like, figuring out those magical moments of mystery and discovering things that you didn't know about the game because they weren't explicitly told to you, but it's more about, the community kind of coming together and solving them and working things out. And I think just in its game design, Pokemon has but generally since the original game has lent more and more towards direction and showing you what to do and telling you where to go and not really having much off the beaten path and being very linear and not like in Blue and Red, you could face like I think Sabrina and Koga and Erica maybe in different order potentially.
No,
like some of them you could go to Lavender Town before you go to some other town. Like there was that kind of section of cities within the middle of the map that you could kind of skirt around and almost do in a different order than anyone else could. But also it was at a time where the main narrative wasn't really anything to do with, like there was Team Rocket and stuff like that, but it was more about, hey, this is your journey, you're going to go and explore and become a master. Yeah. Whereas now it's much more about, there's a legendary Pokemon from 3,000 years ago, and we must talk about how important it is, and there's this NPC who's this person who has this legendary Pokemon, and they're a mystery. Like, they have their own really badly told story that they want to force on you with cutscenes and stuff, and so naturally it's going to lean in that direction.
Yeah, and it just feels like the good old Team Rocket bases and just the concept of bases and buildings, like towers that have traditionally been in games, like haunted towers and things, and that are like separate sometimes to the main story, but kind of challenging, and you have to get to this point.
Dungeons almost.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think Pokemon Blue, we've talked about before, was far more of a JRPG than its descendants, because it was much more about like, here's Mount Moon, just fucking figure your way through it, and like, okay, here's Team Rocket's base, there's all these fucking conveyor belts and there's like 9 floors, and like, fucking figure it out, man. Like, there's Lapras in there somewhere, you can find it if you want, but like, who the fuck knows? Like, get the card keys. Like, it was a bit of a in all honesty, I think some of that stuff is a little rough to go back to, just because it's hard to keep track of the floors. It was all on Game Boy in black and white. A lot of the floors look exactly the same, so it's like figuring out teleportation pads and things like that. It did get a little bit tricky, but I would prefer that, I think, than the direction it's gone in, which is like, hey, walk through this tunnel. We're going to give you a healer every 2 steps and stuff like that. So it makes the journey easier. It makes it much less frictionless, but it does lose a lot of the sense of adventure, right? And I think that a lot of people these days with video games are starting to come back to that idea of like, hey man, like Dark Souls, Breath of the Wild, these games that really throw you in and say, just do what the fuck you want, like figure it out, man. Games are starting to come back round to that, and I think Pokemon is a series that has decided, no, I'm actually going in this opposite direction.
And for me personally, that is a bit disappointing, because as like, I actually think the Alolan Pokemon are fantastic. I love the idea that they've gone back to like, first generation Pokemon, and there are like different forms with different typings, different attacks. I love that idea. I think that was a fantastic move. But yeah, just the lack of like any dungeons, the lack of that difficulty, the lack of I don't know. It feels like Pokemon's moved into a place that is just so different from what, like the ice caves in Pokemon Gold and Silver, that was like really challenging. It's like,
yeah, one of my favorite memories of Gold and Silver was being the only person in our friend group who knew how to get through them. And so we would go over, we'd have like a party at someone's house, and everyone would be like, hey man, I'm stuck in the ice cave, can you get me out? And I'm like, I know how to do this puzzle, I will do this puzzle for you. And just being the person that people went to who figured out the puzzle for them, I thought was a fun thing. And stuff like that they just don't do
I mean, I'm like
stuff anymore.
20 hours in maybe, and I've not faced like a single puzzle. There's been like one area where I've had to remember a code, and it wasn't even remembering a code that I typed in. It was a code that I had to pick between 3 options. Like it's just so, it feels very dumbed down just at every single opportunity. And I'm not making a final judgment on this game because I've not reached all the legendary plot stuff end game, which I think Pokemon at times has done quite well, and it is quite interesting. And I must say, like, I do find like the Alolan world cool. Like I think this is something I mentioned this off mic as well, MBZ, but since going to Japan, like I have gotten more and more out of every Japanese video game that I've played, in the sense that like this building is shaped like this and there's a vending machine everywhere, and I know that that's like that because that's what it's like in Japan, and this is based on that thing that I know about. And there's just this constant referencing, like, oh, I know that the design of this building looks a bit like that, and I just get a real kick out of seeing Japanese architecture, Japanese town design, Japanese, the way that routes are laid out just feels very much like visiting Japan, and I get a kick out of that even in a series like Pokemon, where it is very much based on Hawaii, even though there are some tropical islands to the south of Japan that I'm sure that reference this as well. But yeah, I am enjoying the world quite a bit, which is nice.
Cool. I'm sure you'll be finishing that up for next time before the big one drops, because we are mere days away from Fire Emblem Three Houses. So yeah, exciting stuff. Cool. Anything else you've been checking in with? Obviously we also played another game which we'll probably save for next time, because we're gonna hopefully try and finish it, which is Blazing Chrome, which is a Contra style co-op game. That you know how much we loved Contra 3, so I think coming back to our own lingo of like saying random things out loud, like blue balls and ninjas, which I like that when you play games like that, you develop your own language
for
communicating.
Yeah,
communicating with
as
each
fast
other
as you can.
It's fun when that stuff rears its head. But we'll talk more in depth about that next time, probably. Cool. Any other things you want to cover, Bally?
No, nothing else. I'd love to beat Pokemon in time for Fire Emblem.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, well, the other stuff that I've been digging into a little bit is, obviously I played a lot more Mario Maker. Still love Mario Maker. I'm like 50 hours into that thing. I've made a bunch of levels. I unlocked some stuff. So what I was interested in doing was making a specific level based around a secret power-up in the game that you only get by finishing the story mode. And I was like, well, to make that level, I have to finish the story mode. So I went through and I finished the story mode, and I played through all those levels. The thing with the story mode is you can actually finish it without doing every level. I think there's over 100 levels, but maybe you have to do around 60 or so, maybe 50, 60, in order to complete Peach's Castle, get it to 100%. And when you do that, you get the credits, and you get some unlocks and things like that. But the game has, in terms of the story mode, the extra characters like the Undo Dog and the Eraserhead guy, who you can talk to for specific challenges and for specific levels that are maybe themed around a particular item and stuff like that. And the story mode kind of varies in its quality. Sometimes the levels are just like it's a level and it's using a theme that's new to the game, so like the desert stuff with the wind, and like it's building it around what would you do in a level with wind, how would you kind of build difficulty around that and the challenges. Sometimes it's just random things that's a 3-second job, which is like, I don't know, survive this room for however long and then get a key or whatever. It can vary in the complexity and the length. And that's why it doesn't feel like a Mario game, because the levels, as you will find when you're just playing random levels online, are disparate in nature and are not really connected. They're just a whole amalgamation of ideas that are kind of just thrown at the wall for you to peruse and to think about. And there are certainly objects within the game that I have seen an idea applied to and thought, wow, I would never have thought of that. That's a really cool way to use that with another object. And that's led to me having so many more ideas. And I think one of the things that made me dry up in Mario Maker 1 was feeling that sense of, I don't know if I have any more ideas, and like, where are these ideas coming from? And I think certainly the story mode in Mario Maker 2 has given me a lot more to chew on, and as a result has made it so that I feel like, okay, well, I haven't used that mechanic yet. What if I build a whole level around that mechanic and see if I can, try and do something of my own? And obviously a lot of stuff has already been done. Like one of the levels that I made surrounding this secret power-up, I saw a level on YouTube that just fucking blew my mind. I'm like, I'm never going to make something as good as that. Like, it is just way out of my level. But I think if you constantly do that and you always look at other creators and like, well, that person made a thing that's crazy, and how am I going to do that thing? Like, you're never going to get anywhere. Just fucking make something. Like, do something, and sure, there's always going to be someone who makes something better than you, but you can put your own twist on it, and you can make something that is your own, and people will like it regardless. So, I just recommend people, if they are having kind of writer's block to some degree, builder's block, one might say, to not worry about, not stealing ideas, but like looking at ideas from other people and thinking, okay, I could use that. How do I twist it? How do I make it slightly different? How do I fit it more into my level and how my level works? And yeah, I kind of did that. So yeah, you can check out all of our levels. I don't think we've left our maker codes in our description, which I should probably do. So I'll probably see if I can remind myself to do that and put that in the description of the episode. So if people want to follow us and they haven't found a way to follow us so far, then you can do so. It's also, I think I've pinned it to the top of my Twitter account, is my Mario Maker code. So if you do want to play my levels, then you can go find that. I think the story mode for you, Bally, is worth going through still, as someone who, when we did a bit of Mario Maker yesterday and you were kind of like, well, I don't know how any of these things work. Like, I put you on this puzzle level that I thought was amazing. Like, this puzzle level that I'd done on stream that I had spent half an hour figuring out and had eventually come to the solution, and just like step after step, just building through this puzzle level, just figuring out what this person had created. And I gave it to you and you're like, I don't really want to figure this out. I don't know what any of these things do and like how they interact. And I'm like, okay, Bally, you need to go away and play the story mode to like learn how all these mechanics interact with one another. Because I think once you do that and get a better sense of what people can do with levels, I think you're much more open to trying things that are maybe a bit trickier that you might come up against and be initially like, oh, I'm a bit hesitant about playing this, but otherwise. Yeah, no,
I've definitely tried to plow ahead so much with Pokemon that I've definitely put Mario Maker a bit too much on the back burner, and I'm keen to just like finish up Pokemon, then get to like that Mario Maker story mode and just play the whole of story mode, get all those juices going again and make some more levels. And then as you say, I'll be much more kind of turned on to like all the mechanics of all the different like game modes and game types, like between world, 3D world, etc. So I there's definitely a lot more Mario Maker for me to play this year.
Fantastic. And I keep making levels, keep spending way too much time on them and then patching them, for God's sake. This last level I did, I played it.
You got to play test it more, MPZ.
No, but like the problem is, it's so hard when you're in your own head. It is so hard to think about
to get out of your own head.
What the person who is playing this for the first time will do, and how they will get to this particular point. So you end up having to play section. There's one section in particular which is kind of an auto scroll section you can only see the eventual outcome if you play it from the start of it every time. And so trying everything possible from that start point becomes a thing that is somewhat tiresome, right? And so it's like, it's much easier to just put it out there, send it to some Twitch streamers, watch them play it and think, oh, for fuck's sake. They just, like, I have this whole puzzle in my brain and they just somehow trip over themselves and get the key. And I'm like, what? Fuck, I didn't mean to do that. Like, I need to change that. So twice I patched my level, and now I think it is solved. And now I think that people have to figure it out. They have to solve it the right way, Bally, goddammit. So that's been a fun process, and I'll continue to chip away at that and just some of the creation and some of the just ideas people have, like that mole level that I made you play yesterday.
Like that was
people
ridiculous.
People are crazy, man. They just come up with nutso ideas. The table tennis one is just like, wow. Contraptions, man. Contraptions of Mario Maker. It's the argument for having limitation is that creativity comes from that. So. Hell yes. And then the other thing, I haven't played much of it yet, but I'll probably talk about it more next time, is the DLC came out for The Messenger, game that I really enjoyed from last year, thought was fantastic. and has gone down in my estimation because they fucking made me replay the final area and the final boss again, having not played the game in a year, just so I can access this DLC, which I will say is among one of the worst decisions I can see developers making. It drove me fucking insane that I had to play through this end game area, relearning the controls and everything, and I just don't understand why they did it. I really don't. Like, if you are so concerned about people jumping into this thing that is a bit more difficult, just say, hey guys, this is hard, maybe practice before doing so or whatever, or just deal with it and deal with the fact that it's hard. But throwing me back through the end of the game again, just to prove a point that you need to have your skills up to par for going through this DLC, I think is just really, really stupid, and just a bad decision. But I did do it. I went through and I beat the final boss again, which took way longer than I wanted it to, and I just kept cursing the game out because of stupid shit that was just me relearning the controls, because there's some hard platforming stuff that happens at the end of that game, and it's like, if you just jump right into it sight unseen again, it's like, I don't remember anything about how to play this. So yeah, anyway, I then just started the DLC, and I spent half an hour fighting the first boss of it, which is like the first thing you do in that game, and it's really tricky. I enjoyed going through it, but man, they definitely have upped the ante here. This is a much harder pack of stuff that they have, which I'm excited to dig into, but also, like, I wish I could have just jumped into it and not spent all that time doing stuff that I've already done. I know it was a while ago, but I did do it, so anyway, that's my rant on the messenger. And
really weird decision.
It just baffles me.
It.
Like, why?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's going to close out, I think, for this section. But don't go anywhere. We'll be back after the break with a bunch of your emails. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. It is the second segment, and we've got some emails lined up. But before we get into those, as always, our email address is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. MBZ falsely accused me of not saying the email address last week.
I did, yeah. If you listen right till the end of last week, you'll see the proof that he did say it.
I did, in fact, say it. So there we go again. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Or post a question, a comment, a criticism in our Discord server.
No criticisms.
No criticisms.
We are the press here, and we will ratify any of these critiques. They will be shoved under the carpet. None of them shall be spoken.
Links to that Discord server on Twitter and in the description of this podcast, so check that out. Our first email is from Eric, who's from Calgary in Canada. With Nintendo seeming to never reintroduce the Virtual Console idea for the Switch, there has been a rush to fill that void with great different retro content. We've seen the NES online app, remakes of Game Boy games, Link's Awakening, Pokemon Let's Go, and great 8 16-bit collections, Mega Man, Castlevania, Ace Attorney from third-party studios. What I'm wondering is, do you think we'll see from Nintendo some bundles or collections outside of the NES app? Or what collections would you like to see come to the Switch from either Nintendo or third-party developers? My dreams are SNES Online, Disney Afternoon Collection, Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3, Mario and Wario Land, and thanks for reading my question last time I wrote in. Cheers.
Okay, so, I mean, the Virtual Console is dead. Like, truly, we are not getting it. Like, I think any person who believes that Virtual Console is still a possibility on Switch, you are quite frankly kidding yourself, because we now live in the era of, hey, the NES Online app, and also, if you hadn't noticed, third parties really, really like putting Switch collections out. All the collections on Switch are just, they're madness, there's so many, and it seems like for them, it's a better business proposition, right? Because you think about the Wii Virtual Console, and okay, you could get a pop when Konami released Castlevania 1 for NES. It's like, boom, here it is. But then as time went on and Virtual Console became less relevant and people were not kind of talking about it as much, Konami could put out, say, I don't know, Rondo of Blood, and some people would be interested, but a lot of people wouldn't care so much, right? And so you had this thing where less developers wanted to keep putting out Virtual Console games because they got less people latching onto those, and therefore their ability to sell kind of decreased, right? Whereas I think what you see now with Switch in the modern era is that a lot of developers are packaging these games together under one banner, charging a higher price for them overall, but probably making more money in the long run, because that one guy who bought Castlevania on Wii Virtual Console only spent, say, $8 versus the $25 he might spend on the Castlevania collection when it comes to Switch, right? So despite the fact that, you know, each individual game piecemeal, if you sold all of them, you could make a lot more money. Doing this, having a big banner release to it, putting it under one umbrella, having like save state options within it, having sometimes museum features, collections like the Mega Man Legacy Collection does, is a way of taking that existing IP, knowing that there is a passion for retro content on Switch, and addressing it with directly, here is a collection with everything, enjoy. And so I think that's why you have seen so much of that happen on Switch. And it's interesting because you see things even like Collection of Mana, which came out, which is like, no one in their right mind would have believed that Seiken Densetsu 3 would eventually be localized. Like, it maybe gives some hope to the Mother 3 believers out there. And it's crazy, right? Because I think Nintendo haven't necessarily done that so much themselves. It is far more on the third parties, and they have taken up the mantle of basically bringing a Virtual Console to Switch, but in a different way. And I think we discussed before the merits and the drawbacks of this, because to some degree it's like, wow, they are actually kind of putting some of the deep cuts in there. Like, I didn't expect to see one of the Game Boy Castlevania games appear on the Castlevania collection, and yet it is there, right? Because one of my concerns is a lot of the deep cuts would get lost, and you do have to recognize, obviously, it's still a Castlevania game. It's still like a very big franchise. So there are a lot of really niche games out there that were on Virtual Console from much smaller publishers, which are games from eons ago that no one remembers, which are unlikely to come out because they aren't something you can bundle onto a collection. That said, I still think we're getting a lot of stuff that the majority of people, like the mainstream, would want to play. And so that's what you're seeing with the collections from Konami and from Capcom and all these other developers, including the Disney Afternoon Collection, which has yet to come to Switch, strangely enough.
Oh, really? I assumed that might actually be on its way now, but
no, they've still said nothing about it as far as I know, because it was a big deal when it was announced, and it's like, you're not putting this out on Switch, Capcom? Are you crazy? Well, apparently, yeah. I don't know. It feels like it should come one day, but I can't think of any example of Nintendo doing this, right? And I think one of the ones on my list is obviously it's Metro Prime Trilogy, which I'm sure you have as well,
sure.
and that's less of Nintendo making a bespoke collection, because that collection is a collection that already existed on a previous platform. It's not even a new collection; it's just an HD probable update of one that they'd already made. But yeah, I don't know.
But what are Nintendo gonna do when it comes to first parties? Because, you know, big games like from the GameCube era, Super Mario Sunshine, Double Dash, Smash Brothers Melee, like,
yeah,
though the GameCube is still the only way to play all those games, and as much as successful as the Virtual Console was through Wii and to a large extent Wii U as well, I get that loads of third parties are doing their collections and that's working on Switch and that's fine, but from a first party perspective, I really don't know the future. And what I also mean by that is that the last 2 years, the NES Classic and then the SNES Classic came out, and now we're having like a lull year. Or was it 2 years ago, the SNES Classic?
I think it was 2 years ago the Super Nintendo Classic came out, yeah.
2 years ago? So we've already had a lull year. So is it weird that we've not seen the N64 Classic, the Game Boy Classic? Are those still to come? Or is Nintendo planning something back on Switch that will incorporate first parties more? I think a SNES Online seems fairly likely, and there were like some potential leaks earlier, I believe. So
yeah,
that's maybe the next step, but still, GameCube and is just a huge thing, certainly in my mind at least, that where there's so many quality games that we've never seen being able to be played since the early noughties for many of them, and we're now in like 2019, and I just think there is an appetite for that. And for first party, I can understand that there's only so much time and energy and money that Nintendo can spend on like marketing in like an annual financial year. Like, and I can understand that during the Wii U, it was often a big deal when some random game like Donkey Kong Country 64 came to Virtual Console. That was kind of like a Nintendo Direct announcement, and like these little things were trickled out through Nintendo Direct announcements, and that was cool and all. But now it just feels like we're at the complete opposite, and is Nintendo treating those games as like a backup for when their backs are up against the wall the next time, or like Switch tapers off, or are they just riding that wave of Switch indie game interest and general third-party interest? It's doing well in terms of that, as of course. Are they just riding that wave and they'll readdress Virtual Console when they need to? You know, like, is it their backup plan?
I don't think Virtual Console is in any plan at all. I don't think it's a backup plan, whatever. I do think that the idea that they are holding back on GameCube onwards games makes sense when you look at Sony, right? Because Sony on the PlayStation 3 had a vast collection of PlayStation 1 games, and I'm not sure if they ever did PlayStation 2 games on there, but they definitely had PSP games accessible, stuff like that. And then you come to PS4, and all of a sudden they're the most popular platform. They don't need to worry about that shit anymore, and they give it like hardly any support. They'll throw PS2 games on there once in a while. But really, you know, these days there a lot more focus comes to things like remastering as well, and so you have the Shadow of the Colossus remake and kind of going into their back catalogue for those specific examples. And I think as we move forward, it might be harder for Sony to do that, just because backwards compatibility from now on is kind of going to be assumed. I think like the architecture of those two other consoles are too similar to the PC, where they can't really do anything about that anymore. It's like kind of part of Xbox's plans anyway, is like everything will be forwards compatible going into the future, so any game that you have is just going to continue to be with you on your account for however long you exist within their ecosystem. And Nintendo currently are also riding high, similar to what Sony were doing with the PS4. So you have to ask yourself whether they need to really put the resources behind getting something like Sunshine or Wind Waker even on the GameCube. The example which I would come to, which is one of the ideas I have for a potential collection, which is what the question is asking, is they already have Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD. It's obvious. Put them together. But also Skyward Sword is a game that people have expressed interest in seeing that put into HD, and the Switch is unique as a platform in that it still has the capability to play a game like Skyward Sword because of the motion controls.
I mean, the Switch Lite doesn't, but we can get
no,
that.
Switch Lite doesn't, of course, but obviously you can make a kind of placeholder on the back saying it doesn't work with this version. But I think one of the important things is that you'd have to figure out a way to do it in handheld mode, and that's the kind of tricky thing about Skyward Sword. Do you implement weird touch controls for that in handheld, which I think could potentially work, right? Because touch and motion are somewhat analogous. But my thought is, hey, how about you do a 3D Zelda collection? 2/3 of the work is done for you, you know, and so you put Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword together as kind of a triple pack, which I doubt Nintendo would do, because Nintendo knows the value of their IP, and they know that they can fool suckers like us to buy Wind Waker again and Twilight Princess again and Skyward Sword again, all separately, right? And I think that's the importance of Nintendo's IP, is that they know the value of their properties, and so shoving things together like those 3 Zelda games doesn't financially make sense for them.
And like Metroid Prime Trilogy is just feels like such an exception, and I really can't think of like another bundled thing that Nintendo have done since like those Mario Brothers, like it's like a SNES package, or
it's the Super Nintendo Super Mario All Stars, which is Mario 1 through 3. Maybe World is in it as well.
Are there any other? I mean, there must be other examples. I just can't think of them now, but they are few and far between like that huge gap in time.
They did have the Zelda disc on GameCube that had Ocarina, Majora.
That I own that, yes. Yep.
Zelda 1, Zelda 2 has all of those on there. So
that's true. That is
true. But aside from that, you're right. They are very reticent to put out big collections of games that have a lot of value. I think Prime Trilogy is interesting because Metroid tended to be a franchise, especially in Japan, that was not as popular, and also it was maybe because it was made by a Western studio, they feel maybe less ownership over it. I don't know. It's weird. But the Prime games are very similar to one another in terms of engine and in terms of look, aesthetic, everything. So they maybe blend together better. Whereas like, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, it's vastly different in so many ways visually. So there's not as much of a cohesion there. So maybe that's some reason as well.
What back to the other point? What year will I be playing Mario Kart Double Dash on something that isn't my old dusty Nintendo GameCube? Like, because
I don't know if there is a year, right? Because for me, when it comes to those catalog titles, well, when it comes to those catalog titles like Smash Brothers, like Mario Kart, where they put one out on every platform and it is that game on the platform, I think Nintendo are worried about putting out something like Melee on Switch.
Eating their tail a little.
They eat their own tail. They worry. But if I'm frank, like the people who still play Melee, they don't give a shit about Ultimate. Like they're never going to. All they want to play is Melee. So and it's similar with Mario Kart, right? Like they don't want to put out a previous Mario Kart that some people might think, oh, that's better than Mario Kart 8. If they put out Mario Kart Double Dash and it's $20 versus Mario Kart 8, which is $60, like you go to the eShop and the value proposition there for a pretty similar experience is vastly different. And of course, Double Dash could be gimped. It won't have the online features of Mario Kart 8. It may have local co-op or stuff like that, but it wouldn't be a kind of full version. But I think Nintendo looks at that and they think, consumer might look at these two Mario Kart products and think, I want to spend $20 on the cheaper one and not on the more expensive one, And
you think that argument can only be made from GameCube onwards? Because like we've obviously seen Mario Kart 64 come to the Wii U at a time when they were trying to sell Mario Kart 8 and so...
Right. Well, also I think we need to keep in mind that Wii U is a distinct case in time where they had to do everything to try and save it, right? And I think that is why they go for tactics such as that. And it's not necessarily saying that Mario Kart 64 wouldn't come out on Switch, because I think Mario Kart 64 is maybe removed enough. I think the problem with GameCube is like you get into this era where games have looked pretty good since GameCube,
to us.
And so I think I think generally, actually, I think if you up-res Mario Kart Double Dash in HD, I think you can't see a huge difference between that and Mario Kart 8. Clearly, there is a difference, right? Clearly, there's textures and stuff like that, but to your average consumer, the average eye, if you see an HD version of Double Dash and put it next to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe,
the 12-year-old listeners have already checked out of this argument.
Yeah, exactly.
I see what you're saying.
Well, there's less of a discrepancy, right, there, and I think with N64 is far more of a discrepancy. You look at an N64 game and you're like, oh boy, that looks old, right? Whereas I don't think you can quite say the same of GameCube. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Some of my dream kind of, collections, like you said, Zelda, like 3D Mario has never been remade other than, 64 to DS. I think that's the only one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one that is screaming from the rooftops is a Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 double pack.
Exactly.
Right? That's the obvious, screaming over here, hello. That, for God's sake, they've already done the HD work on it for that.
But does that fall into your argument before? Like, does that eat the tail of Mario Odyssey if that came to Switch? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, exactly. Potentially, right? Like, that's...
To a degree.
To a degree, but I do think those experiences are different enough, and this is why I talk about franchises like Smash Brothers and Mario Kart, because fundamentally they're pretty much the same experience from game to game, right? Whereas I do think the diversity of worlds and areas and power-ups and everything in Mario games is, like, Odyssey and Galaxy are just completely different games. They come from the same lineage, but the design ethos behind them, a lot of stuff, like, visually, sure, there are similarities, but I do think that they are separate experiences to the degree to which you could put it out and not be afraid of people not buying Odyssey,
I'd throw in Mario Party along with like Smash Brothers and Mario Kart, where it's quite iterative and
Sure, but like Mario Party is also one of those games that I don't know. It doesn't have the same. I don't know. Maybe it does have the same power, but it doesn't sell as well as those other two. It still sells surprisingly well, but
not in terms of sales. I just mean in terms of like if they put out an actual Mario Party collection on Switch, it would just it would have a big chance, in the same way your argument about Melee and Ultimate,
right?
Could eat that tail.
Potentially, yeah, and also, but the problem with Mario Party is that there's, especially in the GameCube era, there's a lot of weird gimmicks. Well, you can do them, right? With the microphone stuff, you can do pretty easily. There wasn't too much outside of that, but
it wasn't. There weren't many. It wasn't that.
Yeah,
much.
yeah, fair enough. It'd be harder to do things like Donkey Konga and stuff from the GameCube. If you're talking about peripherals and bringing stuff back, like, hey, do Donkey Konga collection like 1 and 2, package them in, but you'd probably have to sell a set of bongos again, wouldn't you, to do that?
Damn.
Which, hey, I might buy some more bongos. Bongos are cool. I like bongos. They're good. Any others that you...
Pikmin collection, a Mario Sports collection, a Pokemon Stadium collection, and that could even be rolled in with like Pokemon Snap, like N64 Pokemon collection.
Yeah, Pokemon Stadium's weird, right? Because I think outside of its time and place, it's not really a video game. Like it's more of a 3D battle simulator than it is an actual game. It's more of an excuse to put your Pokemon, like I think Battle Revolution was far worse in terms of this, but Battle Revolution was basically like, hey, what if you played your battles that look good on a Wii instead of on your DS? And that was basically that. I think Stadium still has some interesting single player stuff. Of course, we love the mini games, but stuff like the gym challenge and the Elite Four challenge using rental Pokemon, like that's kind of a fun thing to go up against and to try. But yeah, I don't think that holds up quite as well these days. Yeah, for me, the big one, there was a rumor years ago that this was going to happen, that there would be an Ultimate Final Fantasy collection where they would put out every Final Fantasy game in this one thing. And it would probably have to cost like, $80 or something, or $100 or something stupid. But I look at it now and I look at all the remakes of the Final Fantasy games and I'm like, okay, we're kind of getting to this place where you could potentially, like, you need to definitely get better versions of some of the Super Nintendo games, but we are almost at a place where you could feasibly do the Ultimate Final Fantasy collection, which takes the best versions of every single game in the series and just puts it out there. Again, that's a tricky one because, especially on Switch, Square Enix do so well just putting out, hey, here's Final Fantasy 9. It's 15 quid. Just get it on its own.
And when you mean if it's feasible, do you mean like the file data, the size of it?
No. I'm not worried about that. For fuck's sake, Red Dead Redemption 2 is like 100 gigabytes.
That's literally what I was going to ask, is how big is Red Dead 2, and isn't that the biggest of all time?
No, it's not the biggest of all time. There's definitely bigger than that, but it's to do with compression and...
On consoles?
Potentially, yeah. I think I remember hearing stories about some Gears of War game being stupidly big and stuff like that. But my issue with it, obviously, is... Again, similar to Nintendo, right? The value of the IP. Final Fantasy is a valuable IP, and so bundling them all in a collection, unless you're going to charge like 150 quid for it, which I could see Square Enix doing.
That's the most Square Enix thing possible to do when you think about it.
It 100% is. They would do that. But they would also do it like a super grand edition where you pay like $300 and get fucking like Cloud with a goddamn Buster Sword up his arse statue and like all this other nonsense they would package with it. But the problem with that is that they do, as I said, they do so well just being like, hey, here's Final Fantasy 7 for like £15, you want to buy that? Yeah, buy that. Here's Final Fantasy 12 remaster, it's 45 quid on the eShop. Hello, alarm bells, £45 for this PS2 game. We up-resed it and everything, but like, fuck's sake, man, they already make a killing on those experiences. So as much as I would love it, like I would love a single Switch cartridge that is every fucking Final Fantasy game. And I mean the same for Dragon Quest, right? I would say Dragon Quest is a lot easier to do because the modern versions of Dragon Quest that exist are actually pretty good across the board.
But the answer to this is that they'll do Kingdom Hearts long before those other two series.
Well, they've already done that. That disc exists on PlayStation 4. It's literally everything prior to Kingdom Hearts 3.
Up until 3, I mean including 3, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Square will do that plus 3 in a few years' time, so you will be able to get the ultimate Kingdom Hearts experience. I wonder if Kingdom Hearts stuff will come back to Nintendo, because they had the 3DS game, which was one of the spin-offs. They had a GBA game, it's potential that could come to Switch. I'm kind of surprised to some degree it isn't. Maybe Sony have an exclusivity thing with Square on Kingdom Hearts. But yeah, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest are those two big ones where I'm like, give me a Switch cartridge for like every Final Fantasy. I'd buy that thing.
They'll do it as soon as you beat all of them. That's exactly.
Yeah, that's the problem. Then
just
you put
in
it out.
time for you to beat all of them. Here's the full collection.
Yeah, it'll be a bummer. The problem with doing that on Switch, of course, is 15, which they can't get that to run on Switch. That's why they put out the goddamn Pocket Edition instead. Yeah, they'd probably have to put out the Pocket Edition on that. It would be funny. I mean, even just 1 through 10 or 1 through 12, because 12 is a remaster, which exists on Switch. Like 1 through 12 would be a good collection to do. I'd be down with that. But also, one that I really want is a Xeno collection. Nintendo own Monolith Soft, and Xenogears and Xenosaga have never been on a Nintendo platform, so putting those out would be fantastic. And it's a history of a company that I really want to dig into. So I think that would be a good one for me personally. I 100% think that Konami is doing a second Castlevania collection, which will be, hey, here are all here are the Metroidvania Castlevania games with Symphony of the Night onwards, with all the GBA and DS games. That is like, that's screaming to be a collection is those 7 games. I think that'd be fantastic for you. I think just buy this one cartridge. Here are all of the Metroidvania Castlevania games on one thing, because I've had to bounce between Wii U Virtual Console, Vita, like DS, like all these platforms to play these games, and modernizing them. I 100% think Konami are going to do that. Would be great. And the last one on my list is a Golden Sun trilogy, because Golden Sun's a franchise that we've not seen in a while, and
I've forgotten there was a third game in that series.
Yeah, well, it's weird because they're the 2 GBA games, and then there's the 1 DS game. So yeah, I'd be interested. If Nintendo want to do more Golden Sun stuff, then it would be very smart for them to put out a trilogy release before that, so that people can get familiar and caught up a little bit with it. Any others on your list that you'd like to see?
I think that was my full list, actually.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's more out there.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a thing that I would like to see Nintendo do more of, but I almost guarantee you that we will continuously see third parties mine this well dry, because it's actually, to be honest with you, like it's a pretty decent value proposition, and they're good modern versions that are accessible handheld. I only own so far the Mega Man Legacy Collection, but I have stuff like the Contra Collection and the Castlevania Collection on my wish list, because one day, like, I'll want to play all the Castlevania games again, and it'll be so much easier to just get them all in one place and just do it that way, you know? So, and especially, like, if we want to play through Contra, which we could potentially do, like, I'm down up here in Edinburgh, I could download the Contra Collection, we can just play through Contra 1 together, which would be great, you know?
Exactly.
So yeah, that'd be a good thing to do. But anyway, let's move on to the next email.
Our next email is from Javier from Brooklyn. Hello, MBZ and Ballet. I love the podcast. You guys do a great job. I had a fun question for you both. In a recent episode, you talked about how great it is to see Zelda and Link switch up in a different style of gameplay, along with different characters and cadence of Hyrule, and the same for Mario and company with Rabbids and Kingdom Battle. My question is, who else would you both like to see Nintendo do this with? My 2 examples are Samus getting in her gunship and Trace from Axiom Verge getting in a spaceship, and both of them in a co-op R-type style shoot-'em-up. Secondly, and this one gets a little crazy, the Star Fox crew gets sucked into a black hole, and on the other side they play a Contra-style 2D shooter with the characters from Cuphead in that old-school 1930s animation style. What do you think? Keep up the great work, Javier.
I think that would be a good way to give some fucking artistic injection into the Star Fox franchise, for one thing. You know, like, I think a lot of people complained about the look of Star Fox Zero, which I tend to agree with. It's a pretty fucking ugly game with no art direction of any degree. So, hey, I would love to see what goddamn Star Fox would look like in a Cuphead style. That fascinates me, actually. Like that, I think that would look incredible. Yeah, we've kind of mentioned this a little bit before in the previous email, but I think this is more specific, like, take 2 things and put them in something completely different type of situation.
Yeah, I've kind of gone with, like, styles of games I'd like Nintendo to do more of, and then I think, for me, a lot of the time, it's less about the characters in a weird way. Like, I love Mario games and I love Zelda games, but it's the structure of those games that appealed to me the most above. Right,
I wouldn't say that the thing about Cadence of Hyrule that you found enjoyable was the fact that Link and Zelda were in it, although Zelda seems like an interesting the way that she was designed. It's more about the world of Zelda and the music of Zelda and the enemies of Zelda and like the aesthetic generally of Zelda versus like the characters of Zelda.
So like taking Link out of a game and sticking him in another game, like Soul Calibur 2 doesn't feel like Zelda. It feels like Link stuck in a game. And
but like, oh man, I go back to Soul Calibur 2 now and I look at some of those weapons that they gave to Link, which I didn't have any context for at the time, and like, man, that shit is fun. Like, he has the bug net, and he has the Bigoron sword, and he has the goddamn cane, the cane from Link to the Past. Like, he has so many references that I just flew the fuck over my head when I played Soul Calibur 2.
Yeah. The thing I want Nintendo to do the most, and this is my PS4 hat talking now, is I'd like them to either start up or buy a Western-style, story-driven team that focuses on that third person, God of War, Uncharted style game, and either go for a new character or completely reboot one of their traditional franchises. And Star Fox is probably maybe getting to that point as well. And just make a really great story, because it's just something that they really lack in their arsenal of. Right. And it's completely against their ethos, against like that whole Japanese style of making games. But they did it once with Metroid Prime, and those are actually decent stories in a way. I mean, it's not groundbreaking at all, but I'd love to see Nintendo make that step. And they've hinted at aspects of that idea in certain games at certain times, but I'd love them to just go whole hog and do it. Yeah,
I just don't think that's, like, I understand where that you come from with that idea, but I think Nintendo are not equipped to make a game like that. And even if they
they wouldn't make it. That's what I'm saying. They need to buy the company.
No, but what I'm saying is, even if they did buy Naughty Dog, Nintendo would still have a producer over there saying, no, this is how we do video games, this is what we're going to do, and Nintendo would no doubt Nintendify it. Like, they would
right. But I'd hope that wasn't to the degree where it sucked the entire story completely out of it. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know, if Shigeru Miyamoto's around the corner, who knows? He can suck a story out of anything.
Game you want.
So like, I do think that Nintendo have franchises that, like, I think Metroid is perfect for it. Like, you look at Metroid, you look at the tone of that game.
I mean, this is kind of what I want Metroid Prime 4 to be. I just don't think it will be that.
No, absolutely
I think
not.
It'll be. I think a lot of people have in their minds that it might be like this, and anyone like us who knows a lot about Nintendo and have played like Metroid Prime before, like, knows it's not going to be quite there.
No, it won't be. But I do think Metroid is the franchise of Nintendo's stable that you could best apply the God of War, Uncharted, Jedi Fallen Order style of game to, right? And I think actually it would work really well. I think you look at stuff like Batman Arkham Asylum, and then you also look at Jedi Fallen Order, which is coming out. Both games that are cribbing from Metroid and talking about you're going back to areas and you're doing stuff, but it's still in that third person kind of behind the back action genre. And I think Arkham Asylum is one of the few examples of that style of game doing that, because most of the time they are more linear story-driven experiences. And I think Nintendo would less focus on that, and they would more focus on we're going to do this behind-the-back third-person Samus game, but it's more about going to different planets. Maybe more in the vein of Metroid Prime 3 to some degree. More about going to different spaces, coming back, exploring, stuff like that. And I think you would have some story to it, but I think it would just be less of a focus from their perspective.
And like I said, I'd love them to do that with like a new character and just do something completely different. And who knows? Here's my next crazy idea, and maybe this will happen. Who knows? Like, Nintendo just completely crosses it up with Kingdom Hearts.
Okay.
Visits those, like, you visit those Disney worlds, visit those Nintendo worlds, and then vice versa.
Have Nintendo had a Disney crossover before, like Disney stuff happening in Nintendo?
Have Nintendo ever had a Disney crossover? Good question.
I can't think of one.
I don't think there is. I don't think so.
I mean, Nintendo crossed over with fucking Mercedes-Benz, for God's sake. They'll do it with everybody.
How weird is that?
Yeah, I think about that sometimes, that you can fucking drive a Merc around in Mario Kart. I'm like, what the fuck world do we live in?
Wow.
There's definitely potential there. I don't know what you would do in a Disney Nintendo game, right? Like, would it be Smash Brothers? Would it be like you'd have to make it a party multiplayer thing? I imagine. Like, I think that would be the audience it would appeal to.
Well, I mean, what are the chances of a character from Kingdom Hearts getting into Smash Brothers as one of these last DLC characters?
Yeah, I mean, Sora is definitely a candidate. Yeah,
I think it's it's not a strong chance, but I think it's a decent chance. It ticks all the boxes.
Yeah, he has a history on Nintendo platforms. He's an anime boy. They love anime boys in Smash Brothers.
And I guess for Disney, it's not quite the step of having Mickey, Donald, or Goofy in Smash Brothers. I think that would be a crazy step.
No, I mean, Disney could maybe sign off on a final Smash, right? I can imagine a Sora final Smash, including Mickey, Donald and Goofy.
Yeah. Here's a fun fact about Kingdom Hearts: is they never call Mickey Mickey. He's always referred to as like the King.
Yeah, King Mickey.
Or King, yeah, but they often just call him the King, and it's like. It's just very weird in cutscenes, but anyway.
I mean, Mickey Mouse is basically the king of Disney, let's be frank.
I know, but no one calls him the king outside of Kingdom Hearts.
Well, yeah, of course I know, because it's fucking Kingdom Hearts. God, Kingdom Hearts has infested this podcast in a way that is not okay with me.
It's going to get worse.
It's not okay. I disagree with it strongly.
It's going to end up with you playing Kingdom Hearts. That's what this is going to come to.
I swear to you all on this podcast today, never in my life will I touch a Kingdom Hearts game. I swear and decree it. I disavow the series.
If Kingdom Hearts 4 could handpick your 8 absolute favourite Disney films and those are the worlds they go to, would that make you even the slightest bit tempted?
No. Because I just don't. No, I just don't. I don't care. Because they already kind of did. Like, they've got Pirates of the Caribbean and they got Hercules in there. Like those are two of my favorite Disney films, but it's still
they were cool.
It's not making me want to play it.
That's cool.
Not one iota. I can go to YouTube and look at weird, realistic Johnny Depp in Kingdom Hearts if I want to.
Solid.
It's
what are your crossovers?
Okay, so the first one that came to my mind, which people are going to be like, they did that. And I was like, Persona Cross Fire Emblem. And I'm like, wait a second. I did that already. But they didn't really.
You got really excited for that, and then
I was so... Well, it wasn't, though, because it was Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem. And then actually when they showed TMS, it was more Persona Cross Fire Emblem. And, like, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, it has its problems. I still think it's pretty good. Like, I still think it's a good JRPG. Like, you can have fun with it. But it doesn't quite nail the Persona Fire Emblem stuff. And then I had a twist on it, and I was like, wait a second. Like, I like Persona Fire Emblem. What if we take those characters and throw them into a Danganronpa-style visual novel game where they get killed off one by one?
Oh,
now that sounds like an idea to me. That sounds...
I was also going to say, isn't Persona Fire Emblem coming out next week?
Oh, exactly. No, that was the other thing I was going to say, is Three Houses is basically Persona Fire Emblem. So what I'm saying is, like, you take these two franchises, but you put them into a completely different genre of game, which is a visual novel in the style of Danganronpa. And I think that would be fantastic. Because I think also the idea that you already have an existing relationship with these characters, you know them from previous games, and so when they die, that's going to get you. Like, when you see that happen.
Do you think Nintendo are more likely to try the visual novel style of storytelling rather... Well, I guess I'm answering my own question here. Rather than my suggestion of, like, that Western story style third person over the shoulder driven game.
I think it's far more likely, but mainly because they're a Japanese company, and the visual novel genre kind of is born out of anime to some degree. So they're far more likely to do that.
I just love them to tell more stories. That's what I want from Nintendo, I think.
Well, I mean, they're trying, and I think Fire Emblem Three Houses, what I've heard so far, like, I've heard a lot of people talk. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and a lot of people have praised the voice acting, have praised the writing, have said the story's intriguing, is really good, and like, they've done better, especially with this series in particular. I can't tell you how impressed I was at the presentation of Fire Emblem Echoes. That game did not deserve to get the budget that it did.
Is it a step up from, like, Fates?
Oh, it's a huge step up in terms of the voice acting and the narrative generally, and just everything to do with Echoes feels so much more than they should put into a remake of an NES or Famicom game, for that matter. A black sheep of the series, Gaiden, that, like, nobody knows about unless you're a really, really hardcore Fire Emblem fan, and yet they take this structure of it and they blew it up. Like, it was really impressive, and there's a lot of anime cutscenes there as well, which they also are doing in Three Houses. So my expectation for Three Houses is, like, yeah, they've really gone big with this one, and it is the franchise I think Nintendo owns, which is the most story driven out of all of the stuff that they do. So potentially, like, if you think about it, that Uncharted style behind the back camera,
for Fire Emblem now
could very well be Fire Emblem, could it not?
That'd be cool.
Yeah, hey, the franchise is big now. Like, I would say Fire Emblem is easily top 5 Nintendo franchises.
Top 5.
Bordering
Alongside Mario, Zelda,
Pokemon, Splatoon,
Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing, actually. I would say Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, Animal Crossing are the 4, like, money makers. But then you also have, like,
Mario
Smash
Kart.
Brothers and Mario Kart, which are really the 2 money makers.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about individual franchises versus, like, more kind of spin-off / group settings, that would be the case, yeah. Yeah, it's up there. So I think, Fire Emblem, definitely a franchise ripe with ideas for me. For me, I'm a Fire Emblem fan, so I want a Fire Emblem fighting game. I want a Fire Emblem visual novel. I want a Fire Emblem. Just give me all the Fire Emblem,
You've had your Fire Emblem, what do you call those types of games? The hack and slash Dynasty Warriors.
Yeah, exactly. Dynasty Warriors nonsense.
Yeah.
Which I don't want any suggestions for any of those types of games.
Well, now we're getting a Persona one of those, aren't we?
We are, yeah. We are.
God, right. Anyway.
So the other idea I had was a crossover between Overwatch and a Nintendo franchise, and I was like, what Nintendo franchise would Overwatch work with? And
is it too violent to be Nintendo, or
just
okay?
Overwatch is very cartoony, like in terms of it's not really any blood or anything. Like it's bright, colorful. Like the whole thing is, the best analogy for it is Splatoon. Like it is very all ages friendly. It is Pixar-esque. If you watch some of those Overwatch short videos, which I don't think you'll enjoy as much until you play Overwatch the game and get familiar with the characters, but those are... Blizzard's cinematics are among some of the best stuff I've ever seen animation-wise. Like, they are so well done from, like, little narrative perspective, but also visual perspective. They're excellent stuff they do. And I was like, oh, what if they did, like, an Overwatch Splatoon crossover? And I was like, I don't know, what kind of game you do with that? Do you just do the same game? Because then that's not super interesting. And I was like, what if you put Overwatch in an RPG? And I'm like thinking, what RPGs do Nintendo have? They got Pokemon and they've got Earthbound. I'm like, which one of those works out the best? And I don't know if I'd come to a decision on either of them, but I feel like, imagine a Pokemon game which is set in the Overwatch universe and, like, the Overwatch characters are gym leaders and stuff. And I think it's a fun idea to attribute different Pokemon. Because you see this all the time on Twitter of, like, artists doing, like, hey, here's, like, this cool crossover between my favorite franchises. And you, like, have, Mercy standing next to a Pokemon that is similar to her and stuff like that, I constantly see that on Twitter. So I think that would be a fun idea to be like, hey, they're NPCs in the world, they are trainers in the world, stuff like that would be a neat crossover. I'd say Overwatch and Pokemon as a weird RPG would be fun.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So yeah, those are some of my ideas. I think they're all stupid and none of them are gonna happen, but hey, Nintendo have done weirder stuff.
The most likely one to happen out of all of these is the Kingdom Hearts Nintendo crossover.
No, refuse.
It's going to happen.
I'm selling my Switch if that happens.
Well, we got that on tape. I'll hold you to that.
Look, okay, Nintendo have done... Mario was in fucking a 3-on-3 basketball game with NBA, Like, weirder shit has happened in Nintendo's stable of crossovers.
Then why are you betting so much on it?
Because this feels too obvious. It feels too obvious, But anyway. Saw it in Smash Brothers, fine, but like, no, we're not going further than that. That's where the buck stops. That's where I stop the buck.
Javier, thank you very much for your email. It created a very good discussion. And thank you for all the other emails. Please send those in, as I said at the top of the segment, to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We really enjoy emails. It's good to get through some. And also post your comments on Discord, link in the description, and on our Twitter account @TNL Podcast. That's all we've got time for the second segment. Join us in the third segment, where we're going to be talking a bit about the Lite Switch, the Switch Lite, the next step in... Well, it's not a step, I guess. It's a diversion that we can say, but we'll get to that in the next segment. So see you then.
Alright folks, welcome back to the third and final part of today's episode. And it's time to talk about the Lite that has suddenly been turned on by Nintendo. It's that clinging sound in the background of an old franchise / branding name being brought back. Because the Switch Lite has been announced, cribbing from its potential predecessor in terms of, brand marketing and awareness of the DS Lite.
They've cribbed from the DS Lite and then literally copied the convention, I guess, of the 2DS. It's like, while it's aspects of the Switch Lite are surprising, at the same time, it's also the most predictable thing Nintendo have done based on what they've previously done.
Right, it is among the most predictable hardware announcements I think we have ever seen from Nintendo. And that's besides the leaks, right? I think even if you take the leaks out of it, you think about timelines for announcing iterations on handhelds. 2 years, basically. That was the timeline for DS Fat to DS Lite, timeline for 3DS to XL, and then obviously the 2DS was another thing. They have a certain pace at which they decide to announce things. And I think this is also so one of the things that annoyed me a lot was journalists on Twitter who should know better and should understand how Nintendo do business and what they do, being like, why didn't they announce this at E3? And I'm like, look at the pattern. Understand what modern Nintendo does.
Yeah.
They literally announced the 3DS XL about 2 to 3 weeks after E3. So even shorter after E3, they announced the 3DS XL. They also then announced the 2DS in August following that E3. So, understand Nintendo's convention in recent history is not to announce this kind of iterative hardware at E3. The last time they announced iterative hardware at E3 was Reggie pulling out the goddamn Game Boy Micro from his pocket, right? It's just not what they're interested in doing. That's not their messaging.
On top of the fact, this is, definitely skewed potentially to a younger audience in the sense that it's probably going to be more durable, it's cheaper, it's handheld only, it's already got a Pokemon skin, it's... a younger audience tend to not watch E3 in the same way. So, it's kind of irrelevant that it would get announced at E3. It just wouldn't make sense.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the thing a lot of people fundamentally misunderstand is there's a part of this which is financially driven as well, which is E3 is the end of Q1, whereas this announcement comes at the start of Q2, right? So financial wise, it kind of is okay, we had this big announcement here, now we're going to have another big announcement here, balancing their investors, making sure they're happy and everything. But also, this is the period after E3, the month or so after E3, the news is dead. There is nothing happening. No one announces anything because everybody blew their load at E3. And now it's just kind of the calm before the storm, the waiting before, September, October, November, December, when all the video games happen, everything gets released. So, from Nintendo's perspective, they can own the news cycle. They can have a couple of days, maybe a week, where the only thing people are focused on and talking about is their new iteration on this hardware.
And they have. They've definitely owned it this week, yeah.
And they have. There's nothing else to talk about right now. So that the reason why they do this is, there's a lot of reasons, but I think it is very weird that I see a lot of people who are very experienced people in the industry who are why didn't they do this at E3? And I'm not going to name drop people here, but I'm just saying, it really baffles me that these people are why didn't they do it at E3? It's do you even follow modern Nintendo? Do you understand what they do? Which maybe it's just because I'm very obsessive about this stuff, and I have, I've followed Nintendo in a way that most people don't.
No one follows them as closely as you, MBZ.
No, clearly not. I mean, there are people who follow them even more closely than I do, but I think just from all logical perspectives, this was the most, this is the thing that made the most sense. So yeah, Switch Lite. What do you think about Switch Lite? They announced it. It's coming out. It's going to be $200 to $100 cheaper. They're taking out the Joy-Cons. They are not detachable anymore. They are hard locked into the system. This might as well be the PlayStation Vita 2 because it has a real D-pad. It has no IR sensor. It has no HD rumble even. I wonder if it'll have regular rumble. Like, it must have regular rumble. We assume it has a gyrometer still built in there, so you can do things like motion aiming in Breath of the Wild and stuff like that. Give me your thoughts. How do you feel about the Switch Lite?
I'll answer as quickly as I can in two separate ways. So from one perspective, like money-making Nintendo hat, let's make money perspective. Great. This is going to appeal to a huge number of people who traditionally might have owned something like a 3DS, who want that cheaper SKU, who want to buy Pokemon, who are often younger, or who are maybe more casual gamers who won't want to play on their TV, who will only want to play on the go. I think this is perfect for those. The D-pad's great. Great. From a personal perspective, I can appreciate it doesn't appeal to me, and the only thing that I'm concerned about is if you compare it back to the 2DS. When the 2DS came out, it definitely felt, for me personally, like a bit of a kick in the gut, in the sense that when the 3DS was revealed, the 3D was such a big factor. Like, it was an exciting factor. And when the 2DS came out, a lot of people said, oh, don't worry about the 2DS coming out. You can still play all games in 3D. It's like, absolutely I can, but we know that, like, the 2DS did have a knock-on effect, and, you know,
it was the beginning of the end for 3D in games.
It was the beginning of the end, and there were games that came out that had no 3D functionality, and that is
like Dragon Quest 8,
right,
a big
and like
example,
Pokemon,
which was
like,
hugely disappointing.
Exactly,
to me.
and that's really, really disappointing. Now, take a step back. I'm far less excited about the unique so the Switch unique aspects come in two parts. It's the combination of switching between the telly and handheld, which I absolutely love and is arguably more exciting than the 3D on the 3DS. And then there's the second aspect, which is detachable Joy-Cons that you can play multiplayer with, two-player multiplayer, etc. So the two-player multiplayer wireless kind of useful for stuff like ARMS, 1-2 switch. I'm personally not that excited about it, but I think it is a really exciting, cool thing that Nintendo tried and was a huge focus of the Switch reveal. And I am worried in a sense that if the new SKU, because it's a SKU, not a, you know, it's not the next one, it's a SKU, the Switch Lite. If the Switch Lite is unbelievably successful and you do see developers year away from, you know, making any functionality to do with detachable Joy-Cons, or, you know, punching in arms, or that Skyward Sword, you know, remaster remake that we've been talking about, or Metroid Prime 3, like, how are those games going to work without detachable Joy-Cons? And the simple answer with this new system is they won't. So I'm happy that it exists, but if it leads to a trend in one creative aspect of the Switch being reduced, in the fact that I think there are some cool things those detachable Joy-Cons can do, like the HD Rumble, I think is a cool idea, as few and far in between as those games that use those features are. I just think that it's, again, Nintendo going from, hey, we're going to do this really creative thing, to kind of reining that in a little bit for kind of market reasons at points. And that does concern me as a Nintendo fan who loves to just see Nintendo be wacky and wild and do something different. And then as for the fact that it doesn't have actual Switch functionality, like there is no dock that you can hook it up to a TV. Again, if that is really successful and Nintendo think that, hey, the next Switch we can maybe not have it docked to a TV, like, that would also concern me. And I'm not saying we're there yet. I'm just saying that, is this potentially the start of that trend? And like, I'm convinced that there will be a more powerful Switch, potentially a larger Switch, that will definitely have TV functionality, and, you know, they'll step it up in another way, and I'll be excited for that. I might upgrade to that one, who knows. So I'm happy for it, but there are aspects of it that do concern me.
I wouldn't be too worried in terms of this being a herald of, oh no, we're not going to do the Switch thing anymore, because this product is squarely aimed at a very specific demographic, which is a big one, but it's also paired with the thing that demographic wants to play, which is Pokemon, right? Like, yeah. Pokemon historically, a handheld series, always sells ridiculous amounts. Just one of the most successful things. It is literally the most profitable media thing that has ever existed. It is bigger than Star Wars. It is bigger than Marvel. It is the biggest media thing, singular franchise in history. So you want Pokemon on your platform, and you want as many people as possible to play Pokemon, which is why you put out this device that is aimed at a young audience who wants to play Pokemon, who can have a device that is more affordable for parents to get for Christmas, who are able
use it
to
as a door wedge,
who can throw it around. Like, look at the design on the Switch Lite. The Switch Lite does not look as sleek or as high tech as the original Switch, and I think part of that is the kind of nature of Nintendo's handhelds traditionally, that they are built to live. They're built to survive being dropped on the floor multiple times, and they're built to withstand the kind of punishment that only kids can do to a handheld device, right? So this is squarely aimed at that audience. It is also aimed at potentially an audience of people who want a Switch to take with them and want to leave at home. We kind of questioned Nintendo's account system and how well that works, and I think it will probably be similar.
We don't even know the answer to that question, do we? Like,
not really.
You can't.
No.
We don't know yet that you can shift a Switch account to a new Switch Lite, like you could between 3DSs, for example.
Right. Well, what it seems like, and this is what is currently you're able to do, is there's this idea of activating your Switch account on someone else's Switch. You can do like when they did that update a while ago. You can basically log into someone else's account on your Switch and download their games, but they have to not be playing their Switch, and the Switch has to check in with the internet every 3 hours or so. So what I've heard floated is people would treat this like PlayStation 4, where what you can do with PS4 is if you own multiples of those, one of them is a primary, one of them is a secondary. The primary is the one where you can play anything, doesn't matter, whatever. The secondary is the one where you can't play it at the same time if the primary is playing, and also it constantly pings the internet to check connection to make sure that, you know, you're not going offline and trying to dodge the system, essentially, right? So that makes sense to me, that, you know, people would buy a Switch Lite, they would set one of them as the primary, which logically you would set the Switch Lite as the primary because that's the one you're carrying around with you, which is likely to be offline more often, because if it's the primary, then you don't have to worry about it checking in. Whereas if you set your main Switch as your secondary, it's always going to be at home in the dock, which hopefully means it always has internet connection, which means it doesn't matter if it's pinging for internet connection every 3 hours because it's always going to be there, right? So that's what I've heard. Greg Miller especially has talked about this and said, like, that's probably the smart thing to do if you're going to get a Switch Lite and also have a regular Switch. So to some degree, like, yes, you can have your cloud saves between platforms, you can have your everything kind of work. Whether that works in practice as much as it seems to on paper, I don't know. So we're going to have to wait and see. And Doug Bowser was a little bit cagey with his words about that stuff. So who knows? Because it's it's potentially. Yeah, it's a tricky situation.
And what about losing that detachable Joy-Con thing, and that aspect of the using them as potential like Wiimotes for Skyward Sword, Metroid Prime 3, who knows what? Like, does that concern you at all?
To some degree, right? Because it means that Nintendo are less willing to have off the wall ideas like ARMS. But I think Nintendo has realized that, hey, the bread and butter, what is greasing our bacon here is just our video games, our good old traditional video games, but people can take them where they want to, you know?
Yeah.
We've seen that time and time again. The most popular games, the games that do well, are the ones which don't really have any nonsense. It's Smash Brothers, it's Mario Kart, it's a new Zelda, it's what they do best, which is make really good video games that people want to play on the bus. And so, yes, it's a shame to lose the weirdness of stuff like ARMS, but I do think, to be frank with you, stuff like 1-2 Switch and ARMS was Nintendo hedging their bets at the start of the Switch generation, because they didn't know what type of success this would be, if it would be a success at all. So they loaded year one of Switch with a bunch of stuff that could take it in any direction. Yeah. If ARMS and 1-2 Switch were the most successful thing, then hey, we've got another Wii on our hands. We're going to appeal to the motion crowd. We're going to do that.
Yeah, you're right. It was more of an experiment, more so than perhaps the 3DS comparison with the 3D, where yes, that was an experiment, and yes, maybe they did back out of it quite a lot at the end with 2DS, etc. But it wasn't. They backed to 3D for a long time, and it was a feature in their games for a long time before it went away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. I don't know if because of the existence of Switch Lite just means that they aren't going to be as experimental. I mean, it's you talk about HD Rumble, which I think is a great feature. I actually really like it, and I think there are standout games that do a stellar job with it and actually make some really interesting uses, right? I think Golf Story is like the prime example for me of like, wow, they actually, like, sinking a ball in Golf Story feels amazing. Like, it's crazy how they managed to get that feeling out of it. And it's similar with Mario Odyssey, I think, is another great example of like the zippers, the zip power up, and you like do that. It feels incredible. It's so smart. But where have we seen an example of that in the last couple of years, like since those games came out? That was year one of the Switch that both those games came out. And frankly, like, I haven't seen anything interesting done with HD Rumble. I know Nintendo wanted independent developers to, you know, every time they bring a game to their platform, they're like, well, we want it, but can you use a Switch-only feature with it? And more in recent times, we've seen Nintendo be like, no, it's just Hollow Knight. It's just regular Hollow Knight. There's nothing extra. It's just you can play it. You can play it in the bathroom. Do you know that? You can take this console with you on the bus. Like, wow, look at that. So more and more the independent games that come to Switch are just like, hey, it's that game, you know, it's on Switch now. Like you take comparison between that very first independent kind of showcase they did, where they're like, and this version of Thumper includes HD Rumble, and this version of this indie game is going to be able to use the 2 Joy-Cons as a thing. And as we have gone on the last couple of years, that has really faded away, not only from Nintendo's own games, but from their marketing for independent stuff. And I think they've just realized that, hey, the reason people like this system has nothing to do with HD Rumble or IR sensors or none of that very gimmicky to some degree technology. Yeah. It's because of the portable nature of the system. That's it. That's why people like it. And so it makes sense that they lean away from the technologies that they kind of shoved in there to focus more on the core of the idea.
I do think you're right. The reason it's the fact that it's portable is a huge part of its success. I think that another huge part of its success for a chunk of people, now I don't know how big this chunk is, I'm definitely one of them, is the Switch capability, switching between TV and handheld, like that, ability. So if we are talking about in 4 or 5 years time when there is an actual Switch to DS to 3DS jump style thing, if it's in and around the argument that it's going handheld only, I can imagine that there are going to be a lot of people, including me, who will be very like I really enjoy playing a lot of games at home in front of a TV, So
I would be fascinated to see that data, because Nintendo clearly has that data on hours of people, hours played handheld, hours played console.
I just hope they never back out of that home console link. Like, I do really appreciate it.
And I don't think they will, because quite frankly, you look at games like Odyssey and you look at games like Breath of the Wild, and those are games that deserve to be played on a big screen, right? And I think Nintendo would be giving up their prestige in a way if they were to say, no, you can only play this big open world game on this tiny screen, right? Like they do want you to mainly be playing that on the TV.
To have the ability to buy a console to play it on a big TV if that's what you want. It's that personalized nature.
What I can see is a future, not soon, but eventually, like when streaming technology takes hold and becomes a big thing, of Nintendo will always have a physical device which will be handheld, but then at some point, that handheld won't need a docking station. That handheld can just ping to a TV, Wii U style, in reverse to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Where it can stream the data to any screen that you want, like any screen possible.
Yeah.
So we could be in that future, but that's a future in which streaming is stable and everyone does streaming and blah, 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 because Nintendo are not going to dip their toes into something unless it's proven.
Yeah, and someone's going to probably try that before Nintendo, as much as Nintendo are the kings of the handheld. Like, I just feel like someone else will put more of the money investment and be prepared to sell a more expensive system that can do that,
Yeah. That's definitely a thing that could happen. But yeah, when I think about the Switch Lite, I definitely think about it as, okay, this is Nintendo just trying to double down on, here is a market that we are at this point, we look at the 3DS and we're like, God, that thing is dead. Like, it is dead. Doug Bowser can lie all he wants about how they're supporting 3DS. They are not.
It had a good life.
And it did. Yeah, it had a longer life than anyone could have reasonably expected from it, to be quite frank. And I think it's only because of the failure of Wii U that 3DS was alive for as long as it was, because it was the only success Nintendo had for that entire generation. And even the start of 3DS was just a rocky place. So to the fact that it has carried them through this far, from 2011 to 2019, when basically the final 3DS game is being released, the final major 3DS game, which is Persona Q2, it had a good run, man. And we should probably do like I don't remember if we've done like a 3DS wrap episode or whatever, but we should probably plan one of those where we talk about the 3DS and its life and our favorite games and stuff like that, because we're pretty much, this is the final year of 3DS as a system. And a lot of people said it died years ago, but I say it's still trucked on, and you know, it's still done a good job. But that is to say that at this point, anyone who owned a 3DS or anyone who had been interested in playing Pokemon games on 3DS, they've moved on. You know, they're not playing there anymore. They're not interested. So Nintendo, with a new home console / handheld Pokemon coming out,
Pokemon is kind of the bellwether of when a console lives and dies to that extent.
Yeah, well, when a handheld does, in any case.
Absolutely, like, a handheld, I should say.
When Pokemon comes, you abandon your previous handheld. That's just the way it is. That's what it's going to be. And there are, speaking from the perspective of somebody who is deep in the Pokemon community, who knows that there are so many people out there who adore Pokemon and don't give a shit about the rest of Nintendo. I cannot tell you the amount of people I knew who'd played Pokemon who only played Pokemon, or who played Pokemon but had a PS4, or who played Pokemon but had a PC. And they would not buy a system until Pokemon was on there. The 3DS happened, and like I was playing it a bunch. I was talking to people like Nick and all these other people in Pokemon. Most of them hadn't bought a 3DS, and most of them bought a 3DS the day X and Y came out.
Man.
So I'm telling you from first-hand experience, being deep in the Pokemon community, that even very hardcore video game players like them, they only care about Pokemon and nothing else. So when that bell rings, you better believe that Switches are fucking flying off shelves this holiday, because that game is going to be enormous. It just is.
It almost gives the Switch Lite a head start against the original Switch. Like, it's harder to compare because one of them has come out at a time alongside or close to Pokemon, whereas the other one has been a Pokemon less handheld / home console system.
Yeah, and I think the idea that Pokemon is coming now and this year it makes sense, because the Switch install base is actually at a place where it makes sense for this to come out, right? Like, the Switch install base is what? Are we over 40 million yet? Maybe we're closing on it, I assume, and because of that,
many. Wow, I thought it was way lower than that, but okay.
I don't know the last numbers they put out. I think it's certainly over 30, 35. I would imagine it's closing on 40, if not being over there soon. We're at the kind of numbers that Pokemon Company want to see when they put a Pokemon game out there, right?
I mean, Switch Lite is going to bounce that to 60 to 70 million in a fairly short period of time, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that short period of time, but I do think it's gonna,
in the next 2 years, I should say that.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I do think this system is going to do exceptionally well. I think it will. It's just the perfect solution for young people / more casual people who only care about Pokemon and want to get in on the ground floor. And it's interesting, right? Because this system releases the same day as a remake of a game that is traditionally handheld only, Link's Awakening. So we've got September 20th, and we've got both of those coming out at the same time. So it kind of seems apt that they would put Link's Awakening out alongside a kind of handheld only system. And it's also a big Zelda game, and Zelda its cachet has only risen in the year since Breath of the Wild. So I think Link's Awakening is poised to do really well. I certainly think it's going to sell better than something like Link Between Worlds did in 3DS, which, for a game that is so fucking good, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart how poorly Link Between Worlds sold compared to the install base of the 3DS.
Is it not like even in top 10 or something of 3DS?
Oh, it's like 3.5 million. It's tiny. It is small fry for what Nintendo usually do.
I do sometimes worry about the appeal of 2D Zelda versus 3D. I think 2D's been behind for quite some time in terms of sales.
I think so, but I also think that the art style of this game just pops in a way that I think gets people's attention, in a way that Link Between Worlds just didn't.
Link's Awakening remake, you mean?
Right, yes. The Link's Awakening remake just is like, look at the box. The box art for that game is gorgeous.
Is incredible.
It is so stunning. So you see that on a shelf, and instantly your eye is drawn to it. Like, it catches you so quickly. So for me, I think that this game is actually poised to do quite well because of a variety of factors. Because the Switch has been so successful with Zelda as a franchise. Because on Switch, people buy video games and they play video games more than they do on any other system. And because it just has a visual aesthetic that will get people interested who maybe would not be interested otherwise. And I think Link Between Worlds just lacked a bit of that buzz factor surrounding it, right? So despite the fact that Link Between Worlds easily like top 5 Zeldas, like an amazing game, it didn't do the numbers that Nintendo maybe wanted it to do.
Yeah.
So
I mean, so Switch Lite coming out 20th September, did you say, alongside Link's Awakening? So
yes.
And then we've just got the news that Luigi's coming end of October 31st on Halloween.
Pretty much like the end of each month. It seems to be the end for each of these games, aside from Pokemon, which is the middle of November. It's like 26th of July, we've got Fire Emblem. 30th of August, Astral Chain. 20th of September, Link's Awakening. 31st of October, Luigi's Mansion. And then 15th of November is Pokemon. Let me tell you, this has been a year of two halves. Nintendo's first half of this year was just like... Half. It's just silence. Like, the first half of this year was just like...
Yoshi's... can't even remember the name of it.
That's how significant it was. Crafted World. Mario Maker onwards. This year is straight fucking fire for Switch. So it's going to be a good holiday season for them, and obviously with Pokemon, and it's kind of crazy. But kind of recent news that came alongside the Switch Lite's announcement is that Nintendo are actually putting out a revision of the Switch, which is not going to be like announced as a brand new Switch or anything. I imagine what they'll do is they'll just slowly phase out the older model to the newer model.
Right. Does this just replace the old model then? Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. It's just like an updated revision of the regular Switch. But this one has been fucking juiced up with battery life. They're claiming it will have 4.5 to 9 hours of battery, which compared to the Switch Lite even, the Switch Lite is being touted as 3 to 7, which is up from the 2.5 to 6.5 of the original Switch. So this is a significant upgrade. And if it's true, like, boy... It doesn't tempt me necessarily, but it makes me hopeful for
what
the
comes
eventual,
after that,
the eventual Switch Pro. But also the thing that I worry about is they're only able to do this because this hardware has existed for so long, and now they have been able to refine it. Whereas when you're putting new hardware into the market, the battery life is naturally going to be lower because it's a new product, and you haven't been able to, get it down to a point where you can figure out the battery solution for it yet. So I imagine when the Switch Pro comes out, it'll still be like, it's going to be 3 hours to 5 hours or something, and we're going to be annoyed about it.
Yeah.
But hey, that's what you get for not being a first adopter, right? If you're not getting the system straight away.
Yeah, I wouldn't trade that experience with Breath of the Wild ever. Like, that was the best thing ever, just to play Breath of the Wild when the Switch came out. So
exactly.
Got to be that first adopter.
Yeah. And so, like, I can be annoyed about it, the fact that my Switch is inherently inferior to anyone who just buys one today. But there will come a point where I will want to upgrade to a better model of the Switch anyway. So buying a new one now just for better battery life is a little bit stupid. But good news, right? I think that it's smart for them to do this. It's... For some people who've been sitting on the fence for a while, this might be the thing that pushes them over the edge. It certainly could be, because I think battery life was the chief complaint of a lot of people, and a lot of people who...
Until they realised their Joy-Cons weren't working.
Well, right, that too. God, the thing that pisses me off most is when Nintendo are like, hey, we got new Joy-Con colours, and I'm like, fix your fucking shit before you release new colours. Oh, Christ. If you couldn't tell, the Joy-Con drift has... Oh boy, it's affected me badly. I'm in the firestorm of the Joy-Con drift right now, and it makes me very angry. that Nintendo has produced one of the sleekest systems they've ever made, and yet it is by far the shoddiest hardware they have made in the last decade. Like, it baffles me how shoddy this hardware is. Annoys me, but alas, what are you to do except for buy more?
I just bought new Joy-Cons and replaced it and tried to forget about the issue.
Yeah, exactly. Bally just fucking went full capitalism and was like, hey, Nintendo, you made a bad product. I'll just give you more money. How about that?
It's the Apple charger logic of capitalism.
It really is.
It's horrendous.
It really is. Hey, you can't exist under anything else. You know, you got to exist under capitalism while critiquing capitalism. So, what are you going to do?
But yeah.
Hey, the Switch Lite, it's a thing. Any other thoughts before we kind of close out chatting about this stuff?
Just interested to see how it sells later this year. It's going to be interesting just to sit back and watch that thing dominate, because I think it really is going to dominate
totally,
rest of 2019.
I'm curious in terms of the types of people that are going to be picking it up. How many existing Switch owners think...
There's quite a few existing Switch owners, like on Twitter and journalists and things, who are just like, I can't resist it, I'm getting it. And it's like, wow, okay.
But I do think like there tends to be this compulsion amongst the games audience for this type of stuff that I think we're much better at restraining ourselves with, you know? Generally. And, you know, I think it comes to us as Nintendo fans, like, we're not the types of people who are like, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I'm going to buy that without even thinking. Like, like, because there are so many of those people who exist out there who are Nintendo fans who are like, yes, I will buy Mario Brothers for the 19th time and I will love it.
Because it is my duty as like
because it's my duty as a Nintendo person, and I must do it. And I'm like, hey man, I own that thing already. I don't want to buy it again. My money is important to me. I will put it towards things that I think are important for me to play. But yeah, that's just kind of how we roll. Cool. Well, I think that's going to close us out then, Bally, for this show. Would you like to tell the fine folks at home where they can find us all over the internet and what the things we do? We do a lot of things. One of those things is Patreon. That's a cool thing. It's pretty cool. We recorded an episode about the animated world of Disney and lots of the films from the 90s, the noughties. Hey, you want to hear us talk about capitalism? Listen to that episode. Oh my god, that conversation went in a direction I was not like expecting, and then I was like, Look, I need to... You can't talk about Disney without capitalism. It's impossible. I got out my like international relations theory and just went for it. It was great fun. So yeah, go support us on Patreon if you'd like to listen to that. You can download all 20 now episodes of our 2 exclusive Patreon shows for $5. That gets you 20 episodes, so it's definitely a decent deal now. And I'd like to thank 2 of our patrons, our 2 $10 tier patrons, I should say. They are my fiance Caroline and Atari Alex. Thank you for your support. And one more tie-in with Patreon. We should mention there's currently a Patreon poll going for our 7th Backlog Club. That is a poll between Excitebike 64, Wave Race 64, and F-Zero X, which is also on the N64. So there's a bit of a racing N64 theme. Of course, all 3 of those games available on the Wii U Virtual Console, but you're obviously welcome to play those on another system. We will reveal the result of that poll next week. So if you want to vote in that poll and you haven't done so yet, get on over to Patreon. It costs $1 to vote, and yeah, hopefully you might want to back your favorite N64 racing game, because there are 3 pretty good ones that we still haven't got to. Yeah, absolutely. So go check that out. You can find us obviously in various places on the internet. We're on Twitter at TNL Podcast, which is the best place to go to links for our YouTube channel and our Discord, amongst other things. You can find me on Twitter, spouting nonsense, at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally? I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN 91. Fantastic. You can also contact us via email to send us some messages and things like that so that we can answer them here on this very show. And we always need more, so please send more in to this email address, which Bally will tell you. ThisNintendoLife at gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife at gmail.com. Please send them in. Fantastic. And obviously you can find the show in various places. We're on all the podcatchers. If you have one of those, you just search us and we should be downloadable. But we're also available now on Spotify. We're on Stitcher. We're on iTunes. We're all over the place, man. Just type in This Nintendo Life, find us, and listen to us in your ear holes and such. Great. Well, I think that's pretty much gonna wrap us up for this week. But
I have a shout out.
Have it go on. Give me a shout out, Bally, for the end.
I think I would like to shout out. MBZ, you are working on currently, and the first episode has come out of your top 100 games of all time. This is a video series that MBZ is doing on his YouTube channel. I would highly recommend people check it out. The first episode is out at the time of recording, and I think
is, yes.
You've got a schedule. I'm not going to plant your schedule just in case you don't stick to it, but
sure.
You've got a lot of videos coming where you're going to outline your top 100 games of all time. And
10 videos, in fact, yes.
10 videos. So we've got a long way to go. You've done 100 to 91 so far. It's top quality editing from MBZ right here. I'd highly recommend checking it out. And just to make it clear, this is a separate thing to what we are going to do for episode 150, where we will
because this is just my opinion, and I doubt Bally would go along jollily with my thoughts.
This is MBZ's sole opinion on all platforms, 100 games of all time, and then our TNL top 50 games of all time is going to be a joint list of the top 50 games on Nintendo platforms of all time. So just a plug for that as well, and for a bit of clarity.
Yeah, well, thanks for the shout out, Bally. I appreciate that. But the other thing I want to mention is that list, when it's done, when it's all finished, I have plans to put it together in audio form and then upload that to the podcast feed. So I'll just put that out as like a big, however long it's going to be, 2-3 hour podcast, whatever.
It's going to be longer than that.
Yeah, probably. And I'll just upload that as one singular top 100 audio to the podcast feed. So if you don't catch it on YouTube, you can listen to it here when it's finally done. Cool. Fantastic. Well, that closes out. Bally, next episode, we're going to be talking about Fire Emblem. Oh, I'm excited. The previews have been coming in. Everyone is hot on this video game. I'm stoked. I want to play this.
You're going to be 20 hours in. I'm going to be in the first 2 hours.
20 hours in, mate. I'm going to be fucking 80 hours in. Just, jeez, give me a chance. So I'm very excited about that game coming out. We're going to talk a lot about it next episode. The second half of 2019 begins for Nintendo, and hang on, people, because it doesn't stop from here. We're just going. Thank you, everyone, of course, for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with some more video game talk. Until then, thank you very much. Bye-bye.